Hi there! In this tutorial today I will talk about neutral density filters and how and why to use them. Back in the days when we all used film, we needed filters. I, for example, used them for changing the color temperature. Film was usually balanced for daylight, and when shooting in tungsten light, photos came out yellow without a filter. There was very little I could do in post. Then there was the problem with fluorescent lights. Without a filter, photos turned out green, which was even worse than the yellow. I needed a magenta filter to clean up the green cast, and the filter type depended on what kind of fluorescent light was used. So you had to find out. The best way was just to use a separate white balance meter. Filters was also used when making pictures in black and white. Thank God with digital it's so much easier. But there are still two types of filters that are essential in digital image making. Polarizing filters and neutral density filters. Polarizers cuts flares from different materials like leaves, glass, water, and so on. Flares can be impossible to get rid of even in post. I will talk about polarizers in another video. Today's topic is the other one, neutral density filters. Neutral density filters, also known as ND filters, are used to reduce light that goes through the lens to the chip or film that captures the image. Why would you want to reduce light? Well, there are at least 4 cases that this can be very helpful. After I go through them quickly, I will concentrate on one of them. So be sure to stay tuned and watch the whole video. The first one is to make wide aperture possible in a very bright sunlight. Usually in a very bright light you need to stop down, which means that you need to have a small aperture in order to get the right exposure. Even with the fastest shutter speed, stopping down in bright sunlight is usually a must. But if I want to have a shallow depth of field, what then? With an ND filter you can reduce light that passes through the lens, and the use of wider aperture is possible to get that narrow depth of field. Very easy solution. The second case is when using flash in bright sunlight when making a portrait of someone or something like that. Usually when using flash you have to use around 1/125th of a second shutter speeds. That means that usually you have to stop down and the depth of field might be more than you want. With an ND filter you can use wider aperture to get that nice shallow depth of field. The third case is when shooting video. Recommended shutter speed is half of your frame per second value. Let's say that you are shooting 25 frames per second. Then the shutter speed is 1/50th of a second. And again, in bright light you most likely need to stop down and get too much depth of field. In order to get that nice cinematic look with a shallow depth of field, you need a ND filter. The fourth case is when you need to shoot long exposures in a bright sunlight. With the ND filter it's possible to have longer shutter speeds to get nice pictures of moving water, for example. With a long shutter speed the movement becomes nice and smooth. Let's go and see how I shot this image using a ND filter. I packed my gear to my car. I went to one of my favorite locations in Helsinki, Vanhankaupungin-Koski. The weather was quite nice and it was not too cold. Vanhankaupungin-Koski is an old place where there used to be a power plant, and now it's a museum area. This was a perfect place to use ND filter to get that nice and smooth moving water. The old waterfall was partly frozen, but the water was still pouring down the fall. In order to get the shutter speeds that are long enough, I had to use a ND filter. I have different kinds for different purposes. This time I used a variable ND filter. It actually has 2 polarizers and the front one rotates, so that the amount of light can be controlled by turning the front element. This one is from -1 stop to 6 stops, so if you have a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second without the filter, you can use shutter speeds from 1/60th of a second to half a second with this filter. In this image the shutter speed was 1 second. Yes, handheld, as you can see. No problem with Olympus. The aperture was f4 and the focal length was 40 mm, which has a field of view equivalent to 80 mm in full frame. The stabilizer in my Olympus is pretty good. Without the ND filter this image would have not been possible. This shot was taken without the ND filter, and here is the one with the ND filter again. As I said earlier, ND filters have different strengths. They range all the way from -1 stop all the way to -10 stops. Then there are the variable ND filters where you can adjust the strength. Which one should you get? I recommend first starting with the variable one. It's very practical. But remember that the cheap ones can make some color shifts, so unfortunately good ND filters aren't cheap. Especially if you planned on using them on video shooting. Do not buy the cheap ones. It's harder to correct the possible color shift in a video than it is in a raw image. I will cover the other uses of ND filters that I mentioned in upcoming videos this spring, so stay tuned and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any of those videos. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye for now.